I stand up straight, can you hear me? Okay. Well, good afternoon. It's good to be home in some ways. I graduated from the University of Washington in 2001, and as I walked around campus today, it was shocking to me how little I remembered about my undergraduate experience. So for whatever classroom troubles you are experiencing right now, I offer you some condolences from the future, but you won't remember them. So, my job today, the proposition is, should the recently passed bill allowing same-sex marriage be overturned? And I will be arguing in the affirmative, and I have a few minutes to do that right now. And I want to set this up by basically saying that you all in this room are policy makers. The legislature had their say about the definition of marriage, and now the public will get the final word on this subject this November. That means we are all policymakers, and we must individually make a decision that we think is best for our state. And as policymakers, you have to recognize that someone isn't going to like your decision. Therefore, you have to do what you feel is in the best long-term interest of our state, regardless of how people feel about that. And before we make that decision, we're going to set up and we're going to build a framework for how we determine what makes good public policy. But before we do so, I want to talk about what this debate is not about, because I think that's important to understand. It is not about basic rights. Through the Washington's Domestic Partnership Registry, same-sex couples already have all the rights and benefits of marriage that can be granted. Everything that Washington State has the power to give to a same-sex household, same-sex couple, has been granted to them. There is absolutely no tangible right, benefit of any kind, visitation in hospital, inheritance, parental right, anything that will accrue by virtue of redefining marriage. So it is not fundamentally about basic rights of individuals or couples. It is also not about equality. It is not about marriage equality. If we define, marriage equality as the right to marry anyone you want. And this is important to keep in mind, that marriage is limited in 4 ways. You cannot marry somebody who is under 18. You cannot marry somebody who is a relative. Not that you want to, but you can't do it. You can't marry somebody who is already married, and you can't marry somebody of the same gender. In this debate, we are only talking about doing away with one of those restrictions. Therefore, regardless of what happens, regardless of which side prevails, there will be lots of people who can't marry each other. Now, you may think that people of the same gender should be able to get married, but you probably don't support marriage equality, and I think it's very likely that no one in this room supports marriage equality in the absolute sense. So it is not fundamentally about quote-unquote equality. It is not also, and this is important to remember, this is not about civil rights. There is no fundamental right, and lots of federal court cases have held this, there is no fundamental right to marry anyone you want. For the reasons I mentioned, there are lots of restrictions other than gender. Even if this bill becomes law, you won't have the right to marry anyone you want. Now, what is this about? And I want to draw a distinction between this and the civil rights movement, which we're always trying to kind of hitch the wagon to that movement. Is the civil rights movement was about eliminating race as a meaningful distinction between people, which I'm going to assume you and I agree upon. The effort to redefine marriage is about eliminating gender as a method to distinguish between individuals and types of relationships. Now, I want to set this up by giving you what might sound like a bizarre example, but I think you'll find it meaningful. And I'm going to do so by asking a question. Are my sister and I have a brother and a sister, both of whom are older, not that it really matters for the purposes of this, but I'm going to ask you the question, are my sister and I sisters? Are my sister and I sisters? The answer to that question is no. We are siblings. Why are we not sisters? Now, what if I make the argument to you that we are, in fact, opposite-sex sisters? How does that term ring with you? We are opposite-sex sisters. And then what if I claimed, in my pursuit of sister equality, that my pursuit of sister equality was a matter of civil rights, and that everyone has the right to be a sister? It'd be kind of a bizarre proposition, because as I know all of you understand, The fact that I'm not a sister is not a violation of my rights. It's a product of me being born a male. And it's not something that bothers me, and I suspect doesn't bother you. But we understand that the reason we distinguish between types of relationships based on the gender of the people involved is because we recognize there's a meaningful difference between the gender of people that we apply in all sorts of ways, and we'll get into that in a moment. In your life, you have many different kinds of relationships that are meaningful to you in a variety of ways. You might have a relationship with your children, you have a relationship with your parents, you have relationships with your roommates, you have a relationship with your professors, with your employers, perhaps your employees, with your best friend, with your neighbor. You have lots of different relationships. Virtually none of them are called marriages. The fact that someone's relationship, regardless of its meaningfulness to you, is not referred to as a marriage has never been and is not a de facto violation of someone's civil rights. So, if it is not about basic rights, practically, if it's not about creating actual equality, because it's not, and if it's not about civil rights, then what is this about? It is about, fundamentally, the definition of marriage. This bill, what it would do is change the statutory definition of marriage from saying marriage is a civil contract between a male and a female to say marriage is a civil contract between two persons. That is a textbook redefinition of a term. Keep in mind also that there is no such creature as same-sex marriage or gay marriage. That doesn't exist. There is only marriage, and the same definition will apply to everyone. It would make marriage, as we understand it, a genderless institution. The terms husband and wife would be made gender neutral, and they would be actually eliminated in some portions of state law, and legally eliminating the concept of husband and wife in exchange for terms like spouse one and spouse two. Now, from my perspective, we're talking having a definitional argument saying that marriage is a union between a man and a woman is no different than saying a dog is a canine, a cat is a feline, a pencil is a writing utensil that uses lead, a pen is a writing utensil that uses ink. It is a statement of what is. But now, we have to discuss what ought to be. In the same way, we could say that the term dog refers to both canines and felines. We could say that the term pen refers to every kind of writing instrument. We could do that. It'd be confusing, but we could do that. We could also say that marriage applies to every relationship in which people claim to love each other. But is that something we ought to do? And that is the question that you as policymakers need to answer. Now, I'm going to propose to you that there is a framework through which we can evaluate not only this question, but any question to test whether or not it makes good public policy. And here is my proposal. There's three tests that I think we should apply. The first is that it creates good precedent, meaning it can be used rationally in the future to reach consistent, desirable outcomes. Second, it is built upon principles that we can generally, societally agree upon. And third, that the benefits of whatever the policy change is significantly outweighs the costs of the same. So the first point is, and I believe that this effort to redefine marriage fails at every single point, and that's going to be the thrust of my argument here. First, that it creates bad precedent. Now, first I want to talk about what is precedent and why does it matter. If you have multiple children and one says, I ate all my dinner, I would like dessert. And you say, because you ate all your dinner, you will get dessert. When your second child comes to you and says, I ate all my dinner, I would like dessert, fairness would dictate that the second child should also get dessert. So before you give one kid dessert for eating their dinner, you have to decide if the precedent that you are setting is one in which you are willing to consistently apply. If not, you should either say no to the first kid or change the rationale. Otherwise, you will have children who rightly feel mistreated. Now, in this discussion about redefining marriage, the argument that has been made by the other side very consistently, and I am somewhat sympathetic to it, though I don't feel it makes good public policy, is basically our love and commitment is the same. There's an effort to create equivalency between same-sex relationships and opposite-sex relationships, basically on the premise that our love and commitment is the same. Now, I'm not here to challenge that premise. What I'm here to say is that's totally irrelevant to what our public policy should be. And I want you to consider whether or not our love and commitment is the same is a rationale that makes good precedent as we redefine or consider what the definition of marriage should be. Keeping in mind, you can't marry somebody who's under 18, you can't marry somebody who's a relative, you can't marry somebody who's already married, and you can't marry somebody of the same gender. So if we have one of those classifications coming and saying, our love and commitment is the same, when the next group comes and says, our love and commitment is the same, on what basis do you distinguish between those things? And I'd also like, and the answer is you cannot, because there is no standard that the government could ever get involved in assessing what the quality of the love and commitment between two people is. And I'd like you to consider what the world would look like if they actually got involved in that. If you go to get a marriage license today, they don't ask you those questions. They ask you a few questions, but it has nothing to do with the quality of your love and commitment. Now consider whether the county auditor actually got in that business and we had established some kind of love, quality, commitment threshold before getting a marriage license, and that the county got involved in assessing the quality of your love and commitment, because now that is relevant to whether or not you get a marriage license. We may disagree on lots of things, but I think we can probably agree that that is not something we want the government interested in. Yet, if we make the justification for redefining marriage in this way, the idea that, well, their love and commitment is the same, therefore we will give them, we will say that these are exactly the same, how then do we say no to anyone? Because it's impossible to prove that anyone's love and commitment is not the same. Therefore, the proposition, the justification for redefining marriage, I believe, creates bad precedent. Secondly, it is not built upon principles. So the second test of good public policy, is it built upon principles that we generally agree upon? And I would say to you that it is not. And the reason is that when we try to equate same-sex and opposite-sex relationships and say they are in every way the same, we deny something that is obvious in that one has a man and a woman and one does not. Now, is that only a practical, technical difference, or is it meaningful in some way? And I want to read from Judge Von Walker, who was the federal court judge who overturned Proposition 8, which you may know Proposition 8 was the constitutional amendment in California, which defined marriage in their constitution as a relationship between a man and a woman. Judge Walker overturned that. And he said in his decision that, in overturning it, he said, the evidence shows that the movement of marriage away from gendered institutions toward an institution free from state-mandated gender roles reflects an evolution in the understanding of gender rather than a change in marriage. So his argument was not, this really isn't fundamentally about marriage, this is fundamentally about how we view gender. And so the principle that is being proposed if we were to create absolute equivalency between these things, is that there is no meaningful difference between a relationship involving a man and a woman and a relationship involving two men or two women. And that, I believe, is not a principle that the majority of our country, of this room, agrees with, for the simple fact that we understand men and women are different. The first reason that is important is the most basic reason that all children, in science and nature has made it such, all children are the product of heterosexual relationships. And our public policy has heretofore always promoted the idea and encouraged the idea that kids are going to be attached to their mothers and fathers. We think that's a good thing. Of course, there are lots of reasons why that doesn't happen, and there are lots of single parents doing a great job, and there are lots of grandparents raising kids doing a great job and doing their best. But it does not do away, it does not eliminate the fact that it is desirable for kids to have both their mother and father. And the people who are most acutely aware of this reality are those who did not have their mother and father present in their lives. And so as a matter of public policy, do we want to take positions that basically say, well, moms and dads, men and women, are basically interchangeable. And we realize that all kids come from a mother and father, but having them actually present and involved in their lives isn't even something worth pursuing. And you must take that position if you are to say that these relationships are in every way equivalent, because the absence or presence of a man and woman, a mother and father in a child's life is a real difference between these relationships. So let's think about it. You might agree with the idea that the institution of marriage should not recognize gender roles because gender doesn't matter, under the premise that really, hey, separate is not equal. And we hear that all the time in this debate. Separate is not equal. And if you agree with that premise, that separate is not equal, I ask you the following question. What do you think about men's and women's restrooms? What do you think about men's and women's restrooms? If separate is not equal, are we going to eliminate all the ways in which we societally deal differently with men and women? And in fact, in Massachusetts, where the Supreme Court created a right to same-sex marriage in 2005, they now deal with a bill which is affectionately referred to as the bathroom bill. Whether or not men who are dressing for the day as women are allowed to go into women's restrooms, whether that's going to be a legally protected right. That is a logical progression from the idea that there is no meaningful difference between men and women. What do we do with Title IX? I'm the father of 3 girls. I like the fact that my girls can play sports when their grandmother could not. What do we do with Title IX, which recognizes the fact that men and women are different, and it insists that women are going to be given equal opportunities to play sports? Are we going to get rid of those things? What do we do with programs that encourage and incentivize and assist women-owned businesses? Are we going to pretend that there are no meaningful differences between men and women? What do we do with Mother's Day and Father's Day, which recognizes the irreplaceable value of moms and dads in the lives of their children? If men and women are interchangeable, do we get rid of those things? And do we pretend, no, moms really aren't that important individually, as long as there's an adult around to take care of the kids? What do we do with boys and girls sports and youth programs? If we have a team of boys who decide to dress as girls, are we going to let them compete with the girls? These are irrational. These are rational questions that would logically follow from the premise that there is no difference, therefore we will ignore any difference between men and women. What do we do with the Women's Studies program here at the University of Washington? The only reason something like a Women's Study program would exist is because we would be operating under the assumption that women and men are in fact different, and women face different issues than men, which is why we study it. I see that I am out of time, so I will get to my third after the break. Thank you.